For centuries, France built one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Its colonies stretched across continents, its ships crossed every major ocean, and at one point, nearly every corner of the planet seemed to have a French flag somewhere on it. Then, the empire collapsed. One by one, colonies declared independence, maps were redrawn, borders changed, and history books tell us the age of empires came to an end. But what if that story isn't completely true? Because today, France still controls pieces of land scattered across the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and even the coast of South America. Some of these places are thousands of miles from Paris. Some are home to active military bases. Some help France control enormous areas of the world's oceans. And one of them is so strategically important that losing it would instantly shrink France's influence across the globe. So, did France really lose its empire? Or did it simply change what an empire looks like? To answer that, we need to leave mainland Europe and start looking at the map very differently. When most people think about the French Empire, they maybe imagine something that disappeared decades ago. A story that ended when colonies gained their independence. And for the most part, that's exactly what happened. But history left behind a few exceptions. Scattered across the world's oceans are places that never fully left France. They're not colonies in the traditional sense. They're legally France. Not owned by France, but actually part of it. And those tiny pieces of land would eventually give France something far more valuable than territory. They gave it reach. If these territories were nothing more than a few distant islands, they probably wouldn't matter very much. Most of them are small. Some have populations smaller than a typical European city. And on a map, they're often so tiny that they're barely visible without zooming in. So why has France held on to them for decades? Why invest billions of euros to maintain territories scattered across nearly every major ocean? The answer has very little to do with the land itself. Instead, it has everything to do with the water surrounding it. Because in today's world, controlling a small island can be far more valuable than controlling a much larger piece of land. And once you understand why, France's global map suddenly starts making a lot more sense.
Up until now, we've been looking at these islands the wrong way. The land isn't the prize. The ocean is. Under international law, countries don't just control the land they own. In many cases, they also gain special rights over vast areas of the surrounding sea. That means a tiny island, sometimes no bigger than a small town, can unlock an enormous stretch of ocean. An ocean filled with fisheries, shipping routes, underwater resources, and strategic influence. Suddenly, these distant islands stop looking isolated. Instead, they become anchors. Each one quietly extends France's reach thousands of kilometers beyond mainland Europe. And when you connect them all together, a completely different map of France begins to appear. Not a map based on land, but a map based on the oceans.
Imagine someone offered you two choices. The first, a large piece of empty land. The second, a tiny island surrounded by an ocean that stretches farther than the eye can see. At first, the larger piece of land sounds like the obvious choice. But in today's world, many governments would maybe choose the island instead. Because that ocean isn't just water. It's access. Access to valuable fishing grounds that feed entire industries. access to underwater minerals that may become increasingly important in the future, access to some of the world's busiest shipping routes, and perhaps most importantly, access to strategic positions that cannot simply be built somewhere else. That's why these islands aren't expensive problems for France. They're long-term investments. Tiny on the map, but enormous in what they quietly provide.
Of course, keeping territories thousands of kilometers away isn't always simple. Distance creates problems. Different time zones, different economies. And in some places, not everyone agrees about what their future should look like. Over the years, a few overseas territories have held referendums. Some voted to remain part of France. Others have stronger independence movements than ever before. So France isn't holding on to these places simply because it wants to. In many cases, the relationship is far more complicated. Some residents see clear benefits in remaining connected to France. Others probably believe the future should look very different. And that debate is still unfolding today. Which means France's global map isn't just a story about geography. It's also a story that's still being written.
Take a normal map of the world, and France doesn't seem particularly unusual. It's a large European country, but not the largest. Its borders look ordinary. Its territory appears limited. But that's because almost every map you're used to looking at is missing part of the picture. The moment you stop measuring France by its land and start measuring it by the ocean around it, everything changes. Suddenly, France isn't just a country sitting in Western Europe. It's present in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and even South America. Few countries can say the same. That's why these islands were never simply leftovers from an old empire. Together, they quietly transformed France into one of the world's most geographically connected nations.
Maybe that's why calling France's overseas territories an empire doesn't tell the whole story. Empires usually expand by taking control. What France has today is something far more complicated. Some territories have chosen to remain French. Others continue to debate their future. And every one of them has its own history, identity, and relationship with Paris. But when you step back and look at the map as a whole, one thing becomes difficult to ignore. These islands have allowed France to remain present in places where most European countries disappeared decades ago. Not through a single block of territory, but through a network scattered across the planet. So perhaps the French Empire didn't survive in the way most people imagine. It evolved. And that may be the biggest reason France still matters far beyond Europe. At first glance, France's overseas territories look almost insignificant. On most world maps, they're reduced to tiny dots. Some are so small that many atlases don't even show them at full scale. But geography isn't always about size. Sometimes it's about position. A single island can sit beside an important shipping route. Another can place France in the middle of an ocean thousands of kilometers from Europe. Others provide a permanent presence in regions where very few European countries still have sovereign territory. Seen individually, each territory tells a different story. Seen together, they reveal a pattern. A country that appears concentrated in Western Europe actually stretches far beyond it. And that's something a traditional political map rarely captures.
For generations,
Maybe the story of France has usually been told through the borders of mainland Europe, but maps have a habit of hiding as much as they reveal, because beyond those familiar borders lies a collection of islands spread across several oceans, each with its own geography, its own history, and its own connection to France. Together, they create a version of France that looks very different. Not larger because of its land, but because of where that land exists. So the next time you see France on a map, it might be worth asking a simple question. Are you looking at all of France, or only the part that's easiest to see?